one of the last things I want to do here on the scene, it's a little bit more advanced topic, but I really think this scene can benefit from that, and it's adding some reflective puddles on the road. It involves some texturing, some UV mapping and texture painting, but I will try to go through that as thoroughly as possible so you can recreate that. First of all, let's select our road and switch to the UV editing tab right here. And these are many useful workspaces that the new version of Blender offers. So go to the UV editing, and you can see right away that the screen is split into two parts, and one of them is a standard 3D viewport, and the second one is the image editor. And here you can see we are not in the look dev mode, because every workspace keeps its own configuration. So when you switch back to the layout, you can see there's a look dev enabled and UV editing not. So we can switch here too. So hold Z and then go down to the look dev, and we need to adjust the lights too, because it doesn't remember the settings from the layout workspace. So let's check the scene lights and scene world. And now let's do something, and then I will talk about it to explain what actually happened. So let's select all with A, press U, which is a shortcut to UV mapping, and you can find that here too. So it's under the UV settings. So press U and then select the Smart UV project. There are a bunch of options how to do an UV projection, but right now we are only interested in the Smart UV project because it does all the work for you, and sometimes it's not perfect, but right now that'll do. So click Smart UV project, and there are some options here. You can set some limitations and stuff, but just click OK. And right away you can see there is some mesh here in the image editor, and let's pause this for a second, and I will talk about what actually happened, what is this, and what's it good for. Okay, so what happened? The UV mapping is actually a method how to transform a 3D space point, vertex, edge or face to 2D space represented by a texture. So the UV are actually just the letters that are used instead of X and Y, and the only reason is not to get messed with X and Y in the 3D space. So think of it like this is the U coordinate and this is the V coordinate, and every vertex from this object, when we click the Smart UV project, was transformed, or rather was assigned a UV value which is represented with one of these dots. So if you, for example, select one vertex or a bunch of them, you can see how they are mapped to the 2D texture space here. And when you want to use an image texture on a 3D object, you actually have to do this UV mapping first, and then the image information on the texture will be applied on your 3D object based on these coordinates that are set here. And you have to think of it as a paper craft, where you have a wireframe model on the paper that you cut out, bend, and then glue together to create a 3D object. And it involves a bunch of things like creating seams and manual unwrapping, and you can do all these things manually, or you can choose this Smart UV project feature that Blender has if you are not interested in so much precision. And since we are only going to paint some things on the texture in the 3D view, we really don't care how precisely the object is unwrapped. That's why we can use the Smart UV project. But for example, if you would to texture a character or a car or something like that, that's the case where you would go for a manual UV unwrapping. Now just select all again, so press A to select all. Let's go to the texture paint workspace, which is another workspace that's very useful. And again, you can see there are two viewports here. One is the image as before, and the second one is the 3D view, but you can see the mode is not object mode or edit mode, but it's actually a texture paint mode, and you have a bunch of different tools here, and you can play with them right here on the right. And the same applies here. You have the image editor open, but not in the view mode, but in the paint mode, and you can paint here on the flat surface too. Now, we did the first part, which is actually mapping the UV coordinates to a 3D object, and it's all set, and you can see they are here. And the second part we need to do is to add texture to a material. And many times I see this, people interchange the terms material and textures and ask about texturing when it comes to materials and stuff. So I want to point out what the material and texture actually is. And the material is a shading algorithm that we already used. You saw it. We used the default principle BSDF shader as a material, where the material is just wrapper around the shader, and texture is just an image that you can use to affect one of the channels of the material. So for example, you saw that the principled shader, let me switch to the materials here, the principled shader has a base color channel, and it can be a color, or if you click here, you can add a texture, and the color information can be drawn from an image. But to material to know which pixel to draw where on the 3D space, that's where the UV coordinates come into place. That's just the thing to remember, that the material is basically a shader which defines how the object is rendered, and the texture just some image that can be applied to some channel material. And to be able to paint on an object, we have to add a texture, an empty texture to it. And there are several ways to do that. You can do it in the shading workspace, you name it. But since you don't know, and I presume you don't know any of that, let's do it right from this workspace, where you can go into the tool tab here on the right side. And here you can see there is a no textures and a little plus icon. So if you click that plus, it'll give you options which channel of the material you want to use. And I want to paint puddles on the road, and I don't want to affect color in any way. So basically what I want to do, have some roughness on the road that we already set. And then where the puddle is, I want the roughness to be 0, so it's completely reflective. So I want to affect the roughness channel. So let's click that. And we have this little box with some additional options. And the most important thing is resolution here, how large the texture actually will be. And you might hear about someone saying that games have 4K textures now and stuff. So this right here is a default setting with the 1024 pixels times 1024 pixels, and it's basically a 1K texture. And I think for the purpose of this scene and this illustration, we can leave it at that. If you want to make a large print from it, maybe, and very large render, then I would recommend to go a little bit higher to 2K or maybe even 4K. So let's leave it like this and click OK. And what happened right now, our material has a texture assigned, which is called road roughness. The name was added automatically based on the channel that we selected. And right here you can see a bunch of options that have to do something with painting and brushes and side of the brush and stuff, and I will go through that a little bit as we need. Basically, you can start drawing on the texture right away in the 3D view. Let me go back. If you go closer, you can draw here anything you want. So that way you can see this works. We have successfully UV unwrapped or smart UV projected the object, and we switched to the texture paint mode and created here a new texture for a roughness channel in our material. And when we paint on it, it works. And since we are in the texture paint mode, we are seeing the color that we are painting, not the roughness. If you want to see more precisely what happens, you can go to the left side here, because right now you can't paint here because there is no image selected here. So let's click on this image here, and you can select from existing images that the scene has available, and one of them is now road roughness. And if you open that and scroll out, you can see the thing that we painted is represented here on the flat image. Now let me go back a few steps. So we doesn't have anything painted yet. And right now I want to point out very important thing here, and that's this little asterisk here where the image menu is. And it says that the texture isn't saved. By default, Blender loads textures from the file system and doesn't have within the file itself. So to properly use texture, you have to save it first. So click the image and click Save As, or you can use Shift S. Now navigate somewhere on your system, or you can stay right within the folder of your blend file, and you can just click Save as Image. You have the predefined name there, and right now the asterisk disappeared and the texture is properly saved. And now when it comes to painting itself, you need to know what color you want the roughness to be painted with. And basically, as you could see before, let me switch to the material tab here, the roughness, and as you see there is already texture assigned here, but the roughness goes from 0 to 1, same as any other value here, or almost all of them. And on the texture, these values are represented with the color ranging from black to white, where black represents 0 and white represents 1. So if you would like fully reflective material, you would have to do all black texture, which means there is a 0 roughness and the material is fully reflective. On the other hand, if you want to have a full roughness and no reflections there, you paint the image white and you have the roughness 1. So if we want to do reflective puddles, that means we have to do the white road for the full roughness and the black puddles for the reflective material. But I don't like to go full white on the road, because puddles mean the road was already wet. I want to have that a little bit of a reflective surface there, and the orange light really plays nice with it. So I will go to some light gray color, and we can do that here where you switch from painting to fill bucket. Let's adjust the strength all the way up here to 1. Click the color and just drag it down maybe to 0.8. So HSV values should be 0, 0 and 0.8. and just click on the image. So this will be our base roughness value for the whole object, and we can go again, image, and save. You can see there's asterisk again to notify you about that. Let's save that, and here in the viewport let's change to look dev mode and enable the scene lights and scene world. And if you switch to the object mode here, you will see we have some almost full roughness value here. And now if you go back to the texture paint mode here and select the brush, you can actually paint on that roughness channel. But first let's change the color to black all the way, and we want to modify its strength too. And there are several ways how you can do that. You can actually modify the strength with Shift F, and here you can see you can modify that from 0 to 1. So let's go for 1, and if you press only F, you can adjust the size of the brush. And if you now paint with the black color here and switch to the object mode, you will see you have a reflective puddle there. And since we left the feathering on, there are some nice smooth edges to that. So let's go back to the texture paint mode here. Let me press Ctrl Z to go back, and let's paint some puddles. And there's one more thing I want to show you. If you go to the tool tab here, there's a fall off option, and that's the thing that actually determines how soft the brush is on the side. So if you click here to set the really sharp shape, if you now adjust the size, you can see that it's completely sharp. If you switch to the smooth fall off like before, you can see you have that nice feathering there. So I think we can leave it at default, but yeah, first let me draw with the sharp fall off. So let's modify the size, and I really like to have some puddle here underneath that fallen tree, and we need to set up the strength and color again since I pressed Ctrl Z, sorry for that. And let's paint some puddle here. And I want some here. Maybe we can do some wet edge here. And one larger here in the corner. I think that'll be enough. And let's go to this fall off, switch to smooth, and now we can modify the brush to be small and do some smoother edges here. And I do it like this because if we would leave the fall off soft from the start and paint with such a large brush, the fall off would be too large in my opinion. So I'd rather paint the whole shape with the sharp brush and then detail the edges with this fall off. Okay, and now go here into the image viewer, click image and save. We can now switch to the shading workspace, and that's just because I want to show you how it's all connected. Now, shading is by default in the look dev mode, but let's enable the scene lights and scene world so we see what's going on with our scene. And now we have these nice reflective puddles, and this here is called the node editor, and it's something you will get familiar later when you're more into the 3D graphics and more realistic CGI. And this column here basically represents that principal BSDF shader with all the channels, and this box here is the texture with the roughness that the Blender added here automatically. And here you can see it's connected to the roughness channel. Now, the node editor works very simply. You can just take this and connect it to any other channel. So if you connect it to base color, you will now have white and black color on the road. So the original color is discarded, and the color information for the material is taken from a texture. So you can take it and connect it back to the roughness, and now the color is dark gray and the roughness is controlled by the image texture. And I wanted to show you this so you get the whole overview of the UV mapping, texture painting and texturing workflow and the node editor. You don't have to know right now how to work with all of these things. If you repeat the steps I just did, you should be able to paint these puddles with no problem, and it's okay for now. But this gives you some basics to maybe look further next time and explore some more options that the textures and texture painting offers.